Hey gang, we are back for our last hour of channel tonight. Those of you who have been around all evening, I applaud you for getting in 5 channel sessions. That's a lot of awesome practice. For those of you who are just arriving, I'm impressed that you logged in this late. I'm happy to see all of you. Go ahead and do me the favor of downloading the PDF in the bottom right hand of the screen. We are going to be doing a passage today, so I want to make sure you have access to that passage. We have a pretty good group in here, so why don't you guys say hello? Let's see who's here. Hey, Isha, Esther. I recognize a lot of these names. Lynette, Tavleen, Asma, Rimsha, Rubini. Awesome. We have a good group, so we're going to make this last hour fun, even though it's late for some of us. I'm not even on the East Coast. I'm Central. Behind the scenes today, we have Eli, so make sure you ask him all of your awesome questions, and he is ready to take care of you. So tell me, how do you guys feel about psych? Is it a topic you like? Oh, Grant says worst one. Esther says like it. Molly says love it. So we're kind of all over the board on this one. For those of you that like it or love it, this is probably going to be a nice, easy review for you. Those of you who do not love it, you're probably going to be hearing some of this stuff for maybe the first time if you've never had a psych class and you haven't been keeping up with your reading. So we're going to review everything, but I'm going to be asking lots of questions. For those of you who know your stuff, get those typing fingers ready so you can give me some awesome answers. So in the next 55 minutes, we're going to talk about different social actions. So we're going to be diving into why the presence of others may affect our behavior, right? We're also going to be looking at how you might analyze changes in how we're thinking when we're around other people. And of course, we want to look at those other factors that are going to affect social interactions. So we're going to be looking at groups, in-group, out-groups. We're going to be looking at networks. And we're going to be looking at how we might think our behavior is normal or when we start to conform to others' behavior. All of that good stuff is coming up tonight. So first, let's talk about when we have one person surrounded by other people. Do you think being alone versus being around other people, is that going to make a difference? Yeah, it's going to make a difference. It is going to make a difference. So what do we call that if you tend to behave better or tend to perform better? Let me say that. You're performing an action and people are watching you, and all of a sudden you're doing better. Yeah, so it's not peer pressure. We're going to talk about peer pressure, but better performance when people are watching us is exactly what Esther said here. That's social facilitation. Now, an example of this might be if you are a piano player, okay? You're a piano player and you're practicing for a big recital. You've been practicing for days and you're doing pretty good. But then when you get in there, you're up on stage in front of everyone. Some of you might feel a little nervous about that, but studies have shown that if you're doing a task that you're already really good at, being around other people is going to make you perform that task better. So another example of that might be, you're a famous point guard out there who's playing basketball and he gets fouled a lot. He goes to the free throw line and he shoots better during the games with everyone watching than he does on his own. That is an example of social facilitation. Now, there's actually a graph that we can use to represent this relationship. Does anyone know kind of what the name of this diagram is? In your review book. Yeah, Esther, absolutely. It's the Yerkes-Dodson law relationship. So what we're seeing here is that on a simple task, as we become more aroused, so when people are around us, we start to get a little bit more excited. If you're on stage, you're a little nervous. During the game, you're a little bit flustered. Our arousal is higher. We're going to have stronger performance. Now, that's for a simple task or something we're already really good at. Now, for a complex task or something we're not used to doing, we see there's a peak, but then it quickly drops off. So for instance, if you're not a very good piano player, but all of a sudden someone's like, I need you to play this song, you have 15 minutes to memorize it, you might do okay. Then you get on stage in front of everyone, you're like, oh crap, I'm not a piano player, this is going to go horribly wrong, and it does, okay? So again, for a simple task or something you're really good at, the example of the pianist, other people are going to enhance your ability to perform that task, or you're going to have stronger performance. For a really tough task or something you're not very good at, having other people around watching you is going to make you perform worse than if you were alone. So this graph right here, we call this the Yerkes-Dodson law. All right, so there are other social phenomena that are going to happen in group settings. So we talked about now one person alone versus other people around them. Now let's talk about some other examples here. So what if we had a scenario where it's Halloween, a bunch of people are dressed up, and all of a sudden you get a bunch of people behaving really badly, breaking laws, doing things they wouldn't normally do. What's going on there? Esther says de-individuation, and Lynette agrees. Absolutely. So what is the point of de-individuation? What's going on here? The name kind of helps us, right? Yeah, you start to lose yourself, Molly. Absolutely. Yeah, because you have some kind of anonymity going on, a lot of times when you're dressed up, you can start to get deviant behavior. So they talk about this if you have mobs. A lot of time mob scenes. Oh, that's a good one, Esther. Speaking of mobs, Black Friday. People act crazy when they're in those groups. So there's a lot of other things going on with Black Friday, but you start to have the sense of anonymity. You're part of the mob. So if you trample that person, it's not you trampling them. It is the mob behavior and the kind of that hive mind going on, right? So other examples of this are people who are wearing uniforms. They start to feel de-individuated because they're not being seen as themselves. They're being seen as part of that group. All right, what about the bystander effect? What is that? What's the bystander effect? Totally, Grant. Someone else has got it. Someone else has got it. So if someone were to, like, in the mall, drop down and start having a heart attack, if there were 2 people around, both of those people would rush over to their side. If there were 10 people, less people would go and it would take longer for them to go. If there were 100 people, it would really take a long time for someone to go because you'd keep waiting for someone else to do it. So bystander effect really says the more people you have around, the slower and smaller the chance of response. So if you're ever going to have a heart attack in the mall, make sure you're not around many people. That's the name of the game here. Okay, what about social loafing? Totally, Eli. Is there a doctor on the plane? You're thinking, there's got to be another one. I really don't want to get up right now. But you guys aren't going to be like that when you're future doctors. You're going to rush to my aid when I have a heart attack in the mall. Yeah, so loafing kind of sounds lazy. I actually have a friend in college, and we thought he was really lazy, and his nickname was Loaf. So that has always helped me remember this one. So social loafing, being kind of lazy. So an example of this, you guys probably have done some group projects in school. What tends to happen when you get into a group project? So Grant, you're like me. You're like me, a lot of you are like me, that you end up doing everything because everyone else allows themselves to show social loaf. They're like, okay, well, someone's going to do the work. I don't have to. Now, a lot of you guys are those go-getters. You're those pre-meds. You're working hard. So you are not the social loafs, but someone's taking advantage of you because they know that you're going to put in more effort. So I don't have to put in that much in a group project because Lindsay or Shelton or Grant is going to do it all for me. Now, finally, we have peer pressure. This is probably the one that you guys are most familiar with. What is peer pressure? Very nice. Pressure to adopt attitudes and behaviors of a social group, influence of others. You probably have seen this throughout your lifetime. I moved around a lot as a kid. I'm a military brat, so I moved from place to place. And you could feel it even if you didn't really intend to feel it. Like you moved to one state and a certain type of shoes are popular. Even without really noticing it, you're like, oh yeah, I want those shoes too. So peer pressure, you start to just really adopt what other people are doing. There's some kind of social influence on you. It may be really direct. There are people that, really put peer pressure on strong. You have to come out with us tonight. You have to, you have to, you have to. And you give in. There's other types of peer pressure that are, not as noticeable. They're happening. You just don't see it quite so much. So if everyone else is wearing green clothes, you're like, I better wear green clothes too, or I better buy those shoes that everyone else has. All right, so all of these things occur in group settings. So when you're put in a group setting, these are things that you will see happening. These are highly testable in experimental passages. You might see these things tested without them mentioning the term, but you're going to be able to tell by the results and what's going on what we should expect to happen. All right, so let's take a look at a practice question. Which of the following scenarios best describes social loafing? Well, we just said social loafing is the example of where someone's not going to put in a lot of hard work because someone else will. So Eli, if you would go ahead and drag that poll back on the screen for me, I would appreciate it. You guys can go ahead and take a look at these. And get your answers into the poll. All right, I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. All right, so we are pretty split between answer choices C and D. So let's take a look at all of them and we'll talk about what they are. So answer choice A, all the students in the 5th grade class wear the same shirt on their field trip. I think we have the wrong wear. I caught an errata here, Eli. Can you make a note of that? We got the wrong wear. All the students in the 5th grade class wear the same shirt on their field trip to the museum. What is that? Yeah, this is probably more like peer pressure. It may be de-individuation if they had some behavior going on that had to do with that. Yeah, we're kind of conforming under this peer pressure, right? Now, answer choice B is more directly peer pressure. Emily decides to change her hairstyle after observing how many peers style their hair, okay? This is more like a direct peer pressure. Other people are doing it, I better do it too. Now C, Henry is moving out of his house, but he does minimal work in lieu of all the friends who are helping him to move. Does that sound like someone's being lazy because they think someone else is going to do it? Total loaf. Yeah, total loaf. That's the case. Now tell me, what is answer choice D? D is the bystander effect. And I can see how you're thinking, well, I thought someone else was going to do it. But bystander effect is directly related to lots of people around and the response time that someone's going to give if something were to happen. Social loafing is I'm in a group, I'm just going to be lazier because someone else will pick up my weight. So our correct answer is indeed answer choice C. So about half of us got that. Some of us were trapped by answer choice D, worded intentionally with helping because it has to do with how much effort we think we're putting in. So D was put here to trick you on purpose. All right, so in our second learning goal here, we're going to take a look at some of the thought processes that are going to occur when we are in group scenarios. So talking about socialization, let's start with primary socialization. What does that mean? Yeah, so we're going to get a lot of this from our family. So we're being socialized. We're learning how to act, how to behave when we're in social scenarios. So yeah, this is occurring in childhood. People who are really close to us are teaching us how to act. So we're learning our actions, our attitudes by being around others. So this does happen when we're children. An example would be you're around your mom all the time and she covers her mouth when she sneezes. Or maybe she even says Gesundheit when you sneeze, and you learn to do those same behaviors because you're around them all the time. Now, what about secondary socialization? How does that differ? Yeah, this is more of a friend's influence, right? This has to do with social environment. So you might learn this during school or in your adolescence and adulthood. So maybe some examples of this would be, like, you guys give me an example actually. What's an example of a secondary socialization habit? Rules at school. Okay, rules at school is a good example. Language. Yes, you might pick up certain words that other people are using. Rules on the sports team. Absolutely. Like, what do you do when the bell rings at school? Shelton says run. You get up from your desk and you leave the classroom, okay? That is something you didn't learn at home. These are habits you are learning by being around others in school. So examples of this would also be like if you know, kid is on a playground and someone runs up to them and says tag, what do you do? Yeah, you're it, you run, you chase them, now you're it. So these are examples of things we learn by being around other people in certain social environments. Yeah, we're getting a theme of running here, right? Run when the bell rings, run when I tag you. All right. So what about anticipatory socialization? Yeah, we're getting ready for some new environment that we're going to be in. So what's an example that you guys probably, had to anticipate a new environment in the last 5 years? Yeah, either going to college or starting a new job, right? These are things that you're getting ready for. Getting ready for the military, going to a new country. These are all excellent, excellent examples. This is something that I felt like I always had to go through every time I was moving, and this is more in adulthood, but when I was a kid, I moved so much that every time I'd be like, okay, what is this new place going to be like? How am I going to get ready for this big change? It happens more in adulthood because we have more of the maturity to really anticipate how it's going to affect all aspects of our life. So an example of this would be like practicing to get ready. So in this example, if you and your significant other want to have a child, maybe you babysit some other children to get some experience with that. Or maybe you want to get a dog. So you ask a friend, can I keep your dog for a little while to see how it works out? Hopefully it works out well. We don't want anything to happen to the dog or the child. Now, what about re-socialization? Yeah, totally, Esther. That's a good one too. Let's live together first to see how it goes. Yeah, you're changing your beliefs, right? You take certain things, you throw them out the window, and you adopt new ones. So you're altering or changing these things. This is also happening in adulthood. Examples of this would be when you're really retrained to think in a certain way. So the military, a lot of people who weren't very good at taking orders initially, when they go into the military, they are trained to respond to that order. They're going to do it without questioning it. They're going to obey without hesitation. There are lots of things like this. Maybe you go to a school where you're not allowed to just, speak. You have to raise your hand. Eventually, you're going to be trained not to interrupt anymore. You're going to raise your hand. These are all examples of things where you're going to be retrained by the social scenarios you're put in. Now, when we're talking about agents of socialization, what does that mean? What does that mean? Yeah, these are the things that are influencing this socialization. All right, so we're having some good examples here. Family, friends, school, media, groups. So when we're looking at all of these, right, there are some that are going to be more influential on us than others. What are some of the ones you think are going to be the most influential? Yeah, definitely family, right? So family, we're going to see things like how relationships are developed, how your morals come to be, how you speak, all that kind of stuff. Now, what about school? What are you going to get at school? How you interact with friends. Yeah, rules that have to do with how things go in school. Education, right? So you're getting the rules of physics, the rules of English, how you interact with people who are not your peers or your family members, like teachers. These are all awesome examples. What do you get from the government? Yeah, laws. Laws, security, military, all of these things that you're getting from the government. What about religion? Yeah, this can come from family, it can also come from religion, belief systems, morals, meanings of life, guidelines to live by, faith, all of these things. Okay, what about work? What are you getting there? What are you getting there? Teamwork, understanding money, new skills. Absolutely. These are all awesome things. Very nice. And finally, from our peers, we're kind of getting a mix of all of these things because we might have work peers, we might have church peers, we might have our best friends, and we're going to talk about those differences here in a little bit. Now, when we get into the idea of norms and deviance, norm sounds like normal. So what do you think norms really are? Yeah, these are societal norms. These are things that we deem acceptable behavior, okay? So an example of this would be shaking hands after a sports game. This would also be, in America, shaking hands when you meet someone. If you go to France, you may not shake hands with them. You might do the 2 kisses on the cheek thing. That is a societal norm. If you did not do that in France, you might be thought of as rude. Okay, so you got to figure out where you are and what are the social rules that are acceptable. Now, deviance is any violation to those rules. So deviance we really think is a bad thing. When you hear the word deviant, you think super, super negative connotation. Usually when I think deviant, I think like law breaking, but it's not always law breaking because norms are not laws. Yeah, Sheldon, this would be like punching someone in the face after a game instead of shaking their hand. Being a bad sportsman is not acceptable behavior. Yeah, and Esther, that's a good point. Norms are not always good things either, okay? Norms are not always good things. So an example that it is kind of a small law-breaking idea here would be like jaywalking across the street. Littering would be another example of this. What can we think of a negative norm? Let's think of a negative norm. I actually don't have one in mind right now, so I'm excited to see what you guys have to say here. Oh, cursing. That's a good one. So we become used to cursing, and that becomes a norm. That's not necessarily a good norm, but it's become socially acceptable behavior in certain circles. Not all of the time. There are definitely some situations where it's still considered deviant, but in some cases, it's acceptable behavior. And then if someone were to say something like, please don't curse in front of me, you're like, hey, what are you talking about? You can't expect me to do that. This is normal, acceptable behavior. So it depends on the society you're in. It depends on if we're talking about a kind of an in-group idea of what's acceptable or an overall society. So you're definitely going to see norms changing across different cultures for sure. All right, let's go ahead and dive into a passage. I'm excited to see how you guys do on this stuff. I could talk about psych-soc stuff forever. I think it's really interesting, and a lot of it's really intuitive, which is why people tend to really like psychology classes. If you guys have taken them in undergrad, it's a little bit more enjoyable. As much as I love physics and I love math, something about psychology is just so interesting. All right, so tell me, on a passage like passage 1, you only have 2 paragraphs. How long do you think it would really take you to read this? Ooh, Esther, I just noted your example too. Thumbs up is totally a norm in our society, but I think in Italy, this is almost like flicking someone off. If you give them like a thumbs up, it would be like giving them the bird. So it totally depends on where you're at. All right, yeah, I would say 2 paragraphs. You guys can tackle this in 2 minutes. I think that's pretty reasonable. So we're going to put 2 minutes on the clock. I want you to read the first and the second paragraph, which are the only paragraphs here in passage 1. I want you to outline each paragraph, and then we will come back together and take a look. We will go ahead and bring that PDF back up in case you need to grab it to download it. So we'll throw 2 minutes on the clock, and we'll be back to take a look at this passage and the associated questions. Good luck. All right, we are back. Go ahead and tell me down below, what did you put into your outline for our first paragraph? What did you put in for our first paragraph? Yeah, so we're seeing peer pressure here, peer influence, secondary socialization, college, very nice. I like that you are picking up on things that we have just been discussing, things that you think you might be tested on in these questions. So new students are influenced by peers, and it can lead to risky behaviors. All right, what about our second paragraph? We get Irving Janis, so we probably want to highlight that name. What else do we get? Yeah, it's all about groupthink, right? It's all about groupthink. So Irving Janis, we'd highlight, we'd throw in here that groupthink, factors and symptoms, and what happens if we have groupthink. It's quite a bit of detail, but we can come back to it as we need it in the questions. All right, so our passage outline is going to look something like this, although yours is going to be better. How is it going to be better? It's going to be shorter, absolutely. You're going to use your own shorthand to make this passage outline your own. Very nice. All right, let's take a dive into these questions. I'm going to clear out the poll here. The tendency of a college student to go along with their peers due to fear of rejection is due to which of the following phenomena? Get your answers in like 5 seconds. Give you a little bit longer than 5, but I'm closing it now in 3, 2, and 1. I like what I'm seeing here. The vast majority of us are saying conformity. So conformity is aligning our behavior with what is expected or the social norms. Now, what do we have to have for something to be called obedience? Yeah, we have to have an authority figure, someone we think has power over us, absolutely. Now, what about assimilation? Why doesn't that work here? Yeah, this has to do with groups, right? The standards of one's groups being absorbed by another group. Absolutely. And then finally, what about compliance? Compliance can be a tricky one. Yeah, Lynette, there had to have been a direct request. So someone would have said, please do this. And you can either comply or not comply. Now, if that person was not just a peer, but an authority figure, then you could obey or not obey. So our correct answer is indeed answer choice A. Very nicely done. All right, let's take a look at number 3. That last question I just want to point out is one that you can immediately see. This is where I'm making up time. You can answer that question in like 10 seconds. This one also looks pretty short, so go ahead and take about 15 seconds total. I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. All right, we are not quite as clear cut on this one, but a likely contributing factor to the risky behavior demonstrated by new college students is. Okay, so did the passage tell us anything about risky behavior? Yeah, and what did they say caused the risky behavior? Yeah, peer pressure. And when we get with peers and new scenarios, what type of socialization is that? Yeah, absolutely. We would call that secondary socialization. Now, if they were anticipating, like we're changing our behavior, getting ready to, shower in a group shower in a dorm as opposed to having your own bathroom at home, these are anticipatory things. We're trying to get used to carrying our shower supplies in a shower caddy. Secondary socialization is what I'm picking up on from my peers, specifically through peer pressure. All right, number 4. Ooh, this one looks a little bit longer. This one's probably going to take a little bit more time. So we're going to give you some time to try it. Let's put, I think 45 seconds should be enough. 45 seconds on the clock. We'll open up the poll and go ahead and try number 4. All right, get those answers in. We're going to close it up here in 3, 2, and 1. All right, you tell me, what's the best way to approach this question? I'm going to show you our answers are all over the place. Yeah, we can use our outline, but it's probably going to be best to use some elimination here. We knew paragraph 2 is dealing with groupthink. All right, so it can be inferred from the passage that both the author of the passage and the researchers mentioned in the passage would be most likely to agree with which one of the following statements about groupthink. So we'll eliminate. A, the causal factors that transform group cohesion into groupthink are unique to each case. Is that accurate? Esther, I agree completely. It's not even a little out of scope. It's not mentioned, right? We don't talk about causal factors, so we have nothing that's going to make us feel like we have to agree. We can treat just like we would a car's passage. All right, so B. Outside information cannot influence group decisions once they have become determined by groupthink. We could look at this as out of scope. There's also something that sounds pretty extreme, Leanne. Absolutely. Cannot influence group makes it seem like this is a distortion. All right, what about C? Groupthink occurs in all strongly cohesive groups, but its contribution to collective decision-making is not fully understood. Extreme! It says all. I know some of you like to C as well. We got to get rid of it. So that leaves us with D. Groupthink cannot be expected to have a beneficial effect on group decision-making. This is our correct answer. Did anyone eliminate D because it sounded too negative or because it sounded too extreme? All right, so was there anything in the passage that made us think groupthink was a positive thing? Nope. It was pretty, emphatic the way they felt about it. It talked about invulnerability, collective rationalization, stereotypes, self-censorship, mind guards, morality of the group. It talked about pretty extreme things that happened with group decision making when you're put into a group like that and groupthink is occurring. So our correct answer, yeah, pretty negative stuff going on here, should have been answer choice D. All right. In our last little bit here, we have about 20 minutes to go. We're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end of today because you guys are good at this stuff. I knew that a lot of you clearly love Psych Soc because you're killing it right now. So in this last little bit, we're going to talk about some of the factors that affect social interaction. All right, so is there anything you can think of? What are some of the things that determine how we act? Status, that's a good one. Yeah, language does come in there, verbal communication. Our environments, all of this stuff is super, super important, right? So when we're interacting on a day-to-day basis, these are good examples. Our age, our sex, our attitudes, our environments, the way we speak, if we adhere to social norms, do we have deviant behavior, do we use different hand signals like a thumbs up, and certain cultures are different. These are all, different things that we may do. Now, when we start to talk about individual roles and that kind of things, absolutely. So status comes up first here, right? So when we're talking about our status or our role, what does that mean? What does that mean? Yeah, it does have to do with how others view us and our place in society, right? It has to do with our position, okay? Our position in society and how we classify each other with each other. Now, we're going to talk about each of these definitions, but we're going to kind of build up on this. So our status is our individual position. Then we have the idea of a group, right? So we might decide that we're part of different groups. It might define how we start to interact and how we might start to see ourselves. Well, then we have a network. This is even larger. And beyond that network, we have an organization. So we're going to start to define each of these to see how they relate with our interactions. So starting with that status, you guys were absolutely right. This is a position in society that we might use to classify individuals that are within this society. Now, we have a couple different types of status that we might talk about. So first, what is an ascribed status? What is an ascribed status? Yeah, we're born into it. We don't make a choice. This is something that people decide we are in. So examples of this, as you guys are saying here, race, gender, height, build, these are all things that we don't really get a whole lot of say in. This is just how people view us, right? Yeah, if we have siblings or not. Good. Now, we can also have achieved status. That one's a little bit more fun. What does that have to do with? Yeah, eventually you're going to be doctors. You did it on your own. You gained that status. It took effort and you got there. So this one's pretty cool. We also have master status. What's that? Yeah, this is the one that defines you, right? This is the one that most people see you as and that you see yourself as. So this is how you're mostly identified. So then a role, that's the set of beliefs, values, attitudes, and the societal norms that define the expectation for whoever is holding that status. So the role fits within our status. So if you guys want to grab a quick screenshot of this, you can go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to remind you, because we're going to see quite a few definitions on these coming pages. A screenshot on Mac is going to be a Command-Shift-4. On your PC, you can either do a print screen and then paste that into Word, or you can look up for your snipping tool. Most PCs have that. All right, so next here we're going to talk about groups. So what is a group? What defines a group? Yeah, we got to have more than one person, right? Consists of two or more people, and they share similar characteristics and a sense of unity. So technically, when we're thinking of groups, you could have like a group of 5 people just standing over there, but they're not really a group from a social psychology perspective unless they have those similar characteristics and that sense of unity. Okay, so what are types of groups we might talk about? Yeah, peer groups, church groups, ethnic groups. We can talk about in-groups. We can talk about out-groups. These are all things we might consider when we're talking about a group. Now, what's an in-group? What's an in-group? Yeah, that's the one you're part of. So we're going to see that here. So if we start off talking about our peer group, those are the peers that we choose to be around. Now, the thing about peer groups is we are selecting these people on our own. But typically, we're choosing people who have similar interests, a lot of times similar ages, and similar statuses. Now, our family group, we don't get to choose, right? People always say, I get to choose my friends, I don't get to choose my family, and there's truth to that, right? This is determined by your birth, who you're adopted by, who you marry, what family you marry into. So if anyone has any in-laws yet, you don't really get to select these on your own. Now, we talked about that in-group. This is the group you see yourself as belonging to. So what does that make the out-group? Yeah, anyone else, right? The out-group is anyone else. So a lot of times, I mentioned this earlier, what can happen is anyone who's not part of your in-group starts to become the enemy. They start to become someone else. And you see this happen, it may have happened in your high school, or if it did not, you probably saw it in one of those high school movies where you have all these little cliques and they're warring with each other, the jocks versus the nerds versus the goths, the whole thing. Yeah, totally Mean Girls, absolutely. Anyone who's not in your in-group is totally on the outside. And that's how this works. This is social psychology at its not finest, let's say that. Yeah, totally, Shelton. Not that you've seen it. Believable. I don't think so. All right, so beyond that, we have primary and secondary groups. What is a primary group? What is a primary group? Yeah, these are people you're super close with. It doesn't necessarily have to be your family, but it could be like your family and your very closest, longest friends. So your interactions are close, you have bonds with these people, intimate relationships, and they tend to be for a long period of time. Now your secondary groups, these are more superficial type of relationships, might be shorter. It might be like you go on some, summer camp. You don't know these people very long, but while you're at summer camp, you become buddies. These are your secondary group, right? You have some kind of bond, but it's not like you're going to be friends for life. This could even be more like acquaintances, people that you meet through friends, that kind of deal. Now next we get to our network. What's our network? So when we think networking, we tend to think work. Yeah, but again, this has to deal with social relationships among individuals and groups. So we're looking for patterns of behavior in these social relationships. So what's our immediate network? Could be your family. Again, it could be your close friends. These are people who are really close to you, right? Strong ties, groups of friends. Now our distant network. Weaker ties, again, kind of like our secondary groups. These may include those acquaintances, those friends of friends. Yeah, work people, people you may not consider super close to you, but you socialize with frequently. There's a pattern of social relationship. Totally like LinkedIn. You can see your first connections, your secondary connections, the whole thing. Absolutely. And then finally, we have our organization. What's an organization? A school's an example. Clubs are examples. Yeah, Mornike, there we go. We're starting to get some here. Structured entity. An entity that's set up specifically with some kind of a goal in mind, right? So there's tons of examples of this. Schools, teams, maybe you're in a fraternity or sorority, maybe you're part of the chess team, debate club, any organization that has a specific goal in mind. So it has structure and there's some cultural involvement in it. All right, so we can see that there are a lot of levels to social interaction that we're seeing here. So starting with status, building to group, network, and ultimately organizations that you may choose to be a part of. So again, when we build this entire thing out, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, but that's how social interactions are. They're not simple. So again, statuses, the position that you are in society and how you classify individuals. Groups, now we have two or more people that have similar characteristics and they kind of feel like they go together. Networks, that's your pattern of relationships that you start to develop between individuals and groups. And then you have your organization, which is a structured group or entity that has a particular goal in mind. Yeah, and I can absolutely go back to the last slide. Is that the one you guys needed? All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and try one more question for the evening before we wrap it up. So I'm going to clear out our poll. All of the following are examples of a secondary group except. I'm going to close it up in 3, 2, and 1. All right, remind me, what is the secondary group? What is a secondary group? Yeah, weak ties, more superficial. So anything that doesn't fit that idea of weak ties or more superficial is something we would want to eliminate. So in this case, our best friends, those would be part of our primary group, not our secondary group, so we can eliminate them. Awesome, awesome job here. I know a lot of this stuff seems pretty straightforward. The key is it's not always going to be as obvious as some of these questions. Sometimes they're not going to tell you what they're dealing with when they start to present an experiment and ask you to determine, do these results match up with what you're used to? So with that, we are at the end of our lesson today. Again, getting you out just a tad bit on the early side. A very, very quick review here. We talked about processes of social action and how different presence of individuals can affect how people behave. So we talked about de-individuation, bystander effect, social loafing, and peer pressure. We also talked about socialization, how we decide how to behave, who influences that behavior as we grow, and help to develop societal norms. Finally, we finished up with our social interactions, defining the ideas of statuses, groups, networks, and organizations. Enjoy your extra 5 minutes of time tonight. We will stick around to make sure you get all of your questions answered, and I hope to see you in another channel session very soon. Awesome job tonight.